This video is going to start off with the helpful part, and then I'm going to be a complete jerk to some very famous person on YouTube who will not pay attention to this, but here we go. If you have a computer and a laptop or any other kind of equipment, and it has the ability to be completely shut off, meaning it's not in some power down state where it can start up quickly. It actually has to load back up from the main device that holds the operating system, software, and your files. You will be better off setting up your computer to shut down and then you start it up when you need it is absolutely the best option in many cases, if not all of them. There are some limited, very limited cases where it's better to have it in sleep or standby mode or hibernation mode, but virtually all of the time you want to avoid that by making it start up from scratch. If you're going to leave it off for a day or two. If you put it away in a backpack or whatever on Friday and don't use it all weekend, and on Monday you're going to start it up, that's already it being not really being used for 2 days. And as long as you put it away fully charged, and it has the ability to be fully charged before you shut it down on Friday, let's say, then shut it off completely. But that also means that it's forcing you to save all your work. Understand that if you don't configure it to save things you need very often, like let's say you want it to automatically log into things, which I don't recommend, but as long as you don't need it to do anything automatically, really that's the best way to do it. Now, the downsides to leaving it in a partially off state, we're going to call it, all weekend is memory corruption. Usually what the partially shut down status is that the computer turns off absolutely everything possible except the random access memory in the computer. And it keeps updating the random access memory. When it does that, that can be corrupted pretty easily. Normally it doesn't happen, but it can. And remember, unless it's actually a cell phone, stop treating it like one. Now, the next thing is, there's another mode where you can have it save the RAM to a file on your hard drive. And then it'll just quickly grab it and just copy it into RAM and start it pretty quickly. It's not as fast as having it start up from a power down state where the memory is right there, but it may be more reliable. But the most reliable method is for it to fully shut down, fully close all apps, and then you have to start them up again in a couple of days. Now, if you're going to be turning it on and off again every 5 or 6 hours for whatever reason, or if you're only going to literally have it not be used while you're asleep, then suspending it to RAM or having it in sleep mode or an ultra-low power mode is acceptable. Now we're going to talk about Microsoft Windows Modern Standby, or whatever they're going to call it this week. On Linus Tech Tips, he brought up a problem that he said was forcing people to buy Macs, which doesn't make any sense for a technical channel. And I'm disappointed. Let's review. You can tell your computer, or at least you should be able to force your computer against its will, to do things that are not self-destructing, anti-consumer horseshit that Microsoft Corporation keeps being guilty of. That means you disable its ability to do anything other than shut down completely. Now, tricks that the operating system might pull. Having a timer that starts it up in the middle of the night to go check for Microsoft updates while you sleep. Does it really need to update every damn day? Really? You know what? You can find software that doesn't need to be updated every day. True story. Well, yeah, but professional software is always incomplete and is always full of bugs that have to be patched every 24 hours. Really? Except for video games that update with new content and other things that would update with maybe a new feature once a month, there really isn't any reason for having an auto-update routine running on your computer. I know that sounds counter to every technician you see popularly posting on YouTube and Google and on the Googles, on the websites you might look it up. But guess what? Real technicians make their computer to where it's done updating. If I let my computer continually update, all it would do is just give me a new version of every piece of software and eventually demand that I pay up. However, if it would just update things to where there weren't any security errors, because the company actually patched everything, well, then I wouldn't buy their newest version because I wouldn't need to, right? Yeah, there's one business model where you're constantly on purpose making sure it's never finished updating and charging for the service. Or B, you write decent code, you know what you're doing, I'm running a hybrid copy of Windows 7 that doesn't even have Service Pack 1. I mean, literally, there's a Service Pack 1, but it's not on here. It has patches and pieces of it thrown on, along with pieces of software for Windows 8, Windows 98, Windows XP, Windows, whatever, thrown on here. Windows Millennium Code is even running on this thing, simply because they're versions of the routines that had no security errors and never needed to be patched. The only thing that people did after that point was invalidate the old copy and give us a new version that had more bugs. So I made sure that it is not allowed to update anything and can't even try to run auto update. Once I found out there weren't any more updates, and it is Windows 7 primarily, I disabled its ability to update a damn thing. Yes, I can throw a bunch of patches on here that fully update it to whatever the bleeding edge was, and I'm going to be doing that as an experiment. But the next thing I'm going to do is end up uninstalling 80% of the shit it threw on there because I don't use it. Do you really need to have network discovery on your computer that you're not going to be using network discovery on? Do you need it to run an HTML-based web client and web server? Well, the web client would be, no really, do you need your operating system to act like a giant web browser when you're going to install a browser anyway? Do you need it to offer a web page for people to find for some reason instead of just ripping that out because you're not hosting a website on your computer? Yes, Microsoft Windows automatically installs a web server. That's a security problem that, of course, they wrote a patch for. And then they put it on again, and then they have to patch it again. The auto-update feature on my computer is blocked entirely because the only thing it wants to update is to shove more pieces of Windows 8 on. That's how I ended up finding a couple of pieces I could use. The rest of it was erased. Does anybody remember when Microsoft Corporation went out of its way to force people to update to Windows 8 without telling them? And you trust this company. Does anybody remember when a lot of the computer industry wrote patches on your computers to deliberately turn off the fan to save energy or make it quieter or some other excuse? But all it did was kill off computers more often so they could get more return business because you had to go buy a new computer. Does anybody remember when Microsoft Corporation's updates required you buy a new computer because they invalidated your drivers and then threw away all the old copies so you could go back a notch so it would still work? No? Some of you never went through that, or you're repressing the abuse? I remember that because I was the poor schmuck who had to fix all that crap at one time. And you can still see videos about that. So, Linus Tech Tips put up a video where they talk about modern laptops running, I guess it's Windows 11, it doesn't matter which version. Again, it's all the same shit. Something that breaks, that's their fault, that you didn't hack out. Oh, it runs a new version of power down mode. Instead of it powering down to where it just shuts off everything possible but keeps the RAM going, it leaves the processor going so it can update things. Okay, that's kind of cool. Except every once in a while there's a monster download that has to be done because it's essentially replacing your entire operating system, introducing more bugs that have to be patched later, because that's the business model over here versus write it correctly once and then there's no step two. Just make it work. Windows 7 with the last of the patches, or with no patches like I have where I made my own, is perfectly stable and works just fine. I've only had a couple of crashes in the entire time I've owned this Windows 7 install from the year 2004. What year is it? Oh yeah, I have 8 years uptime on my computer. Do you? Now I'm talking about the computer system, not the computer physical hardware. I've changed the laptop itself, the computer. Actually, it was originally a desktop, about 10 times. I just load new drivers and keep going. The uptime rating on this is 8.5 years or something like that. Why? Because I turned off its ability to find anything to download without asking. And even if it asked, I told it no anyway, so I just uninstalled all the updates. The updating software has been disabled because I manually load up drivers and patches. And if the patches require that I run the auto update first, even though it's not going to do anything, I don't run it. I tear it apart and make it go into it. Why? Because a business model based on constantly updating it till it breaks so you can get somebody to buy another stinking copy of your operating system, even if they have to force you to install Windows 8 against your will, is a sign you shouldn't trust the company with anything. Meanwhile, Linus Tech Tips, not Linux, Linus Tech Tips, says that it's Microsoft's fault that they installed this, totally assumed that they were going to do this hack that broke things, but that should force you to buy a MacBook instead of doing what's hard, turning off everything Microsoft wants to put onto your computer, taking control away from the corporation, and just doing something simple. Every time you're going to shut it off on Friday, actually really shut it off instead of just closing the lid or whatever the hell he was doing, that he was trusting Microsoft not to fuck up. Why would you even do that? I haven't put my computer into standby or any of these easy bake oven, fast boot up modes in a long time. I optimize my computer to boot as fast as physically possible from a mechanical hard drive. If I copy this over to a solid state hard drive, it would boot up just as fast as coming up from RAM. Which means it wouldn't be improved by putting it in a power down state. So again, why isn't Linus Tech Tips telling people how to turn their computer off completely? If you're not going to use it for more than 24 hours, in this case it's 2 or 3 days, literally shut the damn thing off and the problem doesn't exist anymore. But then it'll update a lot. Wait a minute, let me get this straight. Are you avoiding the auto update feature that's actually killing your battery and making it overheat over weekend by not letting it run on Monday? How about this? Don't let it run. But it has to update. Why? It's a simple question. Is it because you're running a version of Windows you haven't completely taken control away from? Again, optimize the computer to start as fast as possible. Take away its ability to find any excuse to slow up the work. That means turning off its updater. If the computer doesn't have any holes in it, don't let it patch and create one. And finally, only load software that doesn't require continuous update cycles. But that very much limits my everybody I look up on the net that uses professional software to do anything involving YouTube. Here are the programs they run. If they're doing backrooms videos or something like that, they run Blender. It does not require auto updating. You can disable it entirely. They use video editing software. What part of video edit needs an update? You can do that manually, right? Yeah, manually updating your computer by paying attention to what is and is not working correctly, and maybe deciding that I don't want to trust a company that can't do basic shit it's programmed to do correctly. Now, I understand this might offend a lot of people, but you are giving way too much power to corporations, and big and small, that have a chronic history of breaking shit. And in some cases have an entire business model based on deliberately doing this. And I see a technical channel not acknowledging this and just saying, this is how you fix it. I want Linus Tech Tips to put up a video series where they optimize the hell out of whatever operating system was doing this, including shutting off its ability to do this and locking it down. Then blocking updates if it's not needed anymore by getting rid of all the holes and patches. I'm not kidding. Can they do that? Me and the other geeks did that with Windows 7 all the way back to Windows 98, 95, whatever, as soon as we could. Is it working stable? Yeah. Disable its ability to become unstable. Make failure impossible. If you have a piece of software that requires auto update all the time, that means it's not a finished product. Why are you paying for it? Meanwhile, look for a competitor that finished their work and doesn't need to update it all the time. Adding new features? Yes. Needing to update because it's a security issue? That shouldn't be able to happen. Why aren't they completing their work? Why aren't they just making the old product work properly and then making it static? I use a lot of pieces of software that are portable apps for that reason. But they're insecure. No, they're not. Because they don't turn on anything to break into. My operating system and the software I run doesn't run any ancillary bullshit other than what I tell it to do. And again, the simple solution to the problem that they had on the channel was tell people how to shut their computer down completely and stop relying on some sort of hibernation state. I'm disappointed in Linus Tech Tips not telling people how to solve the problem involves breaking your habit of needing it to boot up just that much faster. If you're using a solid state drive, I can almost guarantee you the boot up time is not that much slower. Not enough to warrant trusting your computer over an entire weekend of unmonitored time with a corporation that's notorious for breaking shit remotely because they can get away with it. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good